the human being should appreciate all that comes about in his or her life, that which he or she experiences, and the living of those experiences.
Everything that comes about in the life of the human being, that which he or she experiences and the living of those experiences, never comes about in vain, because fundamentally the law of causality, that is to say of cause and effect, is always valid. Consequently, all and everything that arises and comes out of it has a distinct sense and purpose, and is to be found in the result, that is to say, in the effect. And this is so, even if he or she cannot recognize and understand it immediately, but only hours, weeks, months, or not infrequently, only years later. This has been the case in relation to his or her whole life up to now, and this will continue to be the case in his or her entire life to come. If the human being looks at nature and its fauna and flora, as well as the celestial bodies in the sky, and also the whole universe with its myriads of differentnesses, all of which have a distinct sense and purpose, then he or she recognizes that nowhere, thus also not in the life, and indeed also not in his or her life, is there anything senseless, and that therefore everything has its sense and purpose, and thus also its effect and its result. So there is even a sense and purpose in it, if he or she has a painful experience, and a corresponding living experience of the same comes forth from it. The entire thing has unavoidably a distinct cause, which also leads again to a logical effect, and therefore to a corresponding result. By means of logical, and therefore by intentional consequential thoughts, if he or she is capable of doing so, he or she is able to fathom the probability of the effect, be it in the form of a certain percentage value, or as an effective result of reality, resulting from the cause known to him or her. And if the human being is capable of this thought work, or at least just strives for it in good measure, then he or she can help himself or herself very much thereby, and gain a lot for his or her life-forming process and life conduct. If he or she makes an effort to look at causes and effects, then he or she must appreciate all that comes about as cognitions and results. He or she must also appreciate everything that he or she comes to know through his or her contemplations regarding various things in terms of causes and effects, when he or she thinks about these factors, and then also experiences some things and lives them. Through such contemplations, which result from observations and considerations of causes, their developmental processes and effects, the human being is able to recognize messages through which, if he or she heeds them, he or she can avoid many things such as anger, evil, disharmony, joylessness, disadvantageous, negative, depressive, useless, bad and terrible things, etc. And avoid many problems and grief, resentment, harm, pain, worries, sorrow, unfreedom, unhappiness, unsatisfaction, fury, and rage. However, such messages and practical experiences and the living of those experiences can also be good and positive in nature. Consequently, he or she can gain all kinds and a great deal of benefit from them, although in each case, in the negative as in the positive, he or she must be conscious of the fact that he or she can perceive, realize and understand the respective unvalue or value, however, only after some time, and depending on the case and the matter, as well as its severity and difficulty, only after hours, days, weeks, or even only after months or years. The good and positive happens, however, only if the human being does not rampage around and does not burden himself or herself with evil, ungood and negative thoughts and feelings, be it in relation to life, his or her destiny or himself or herself, or in relation to the fellow human beings, whom he or she must neither avoid nor insult, etc. So, as long as he or she has his or her thought-feeling world under positive control, and does not grouse and grumble with himself or herself, as well as with his or her environment and the fellow human beings, he or she will realize and understand the sense of what comes to him or her from messages, practical experiences, and what he or she has lived through in more or less small or large temporal intervals. Life itself tells the human being that he or she shall be joyful, free, happy, and satisfied, and shall not direct any accusations against life, and also therefore no anger against himself or herself, the existence and life, and thus also shall not fall prey in rage or despair to the jealousy, the egoism, the selfishness, nor to any hatred. But in order to know the why this must not be, he or she must now learn to understand, by appreciating all that comes about in his or her life, that which he or she experiences, and the living of those experiences. If the human being suffers some illness, an injury, accident, or sorrowful loss, then this is of course no cause for vain joy, and to be glad, happy, on top of the world, and satisfied. But even this is never an effective reason to hang one's head uncontrollably, to complain dejectedly or angrily about one's destiny, the unfairness and senselessness of life. It is, however, also no reason to therefore meet the fellow human beings and the whole environment harshly and ill-temperedly, and even to be rancid, in order to thereby provide alleviating air to the personal unfortune, unhappiness, and unsatisfaction, as well as to one's own peacelessness and the personal urge for anger. The whole of the psychical morale, negative state and suffering harm as well as loss, no matter of what kind, must not be considered and regarded as senselessness in life, because everything is based on a distinct cause, which must be fathomed and realized in order to give a sense to the whole, which is usually based on the cognition that the cause for the leiden, that is to say the ununderstanding, misunderstanding and so on, which affects the morale and psyche, the suffering of harm and loss, was created by oneself, that is, no one other than the human being concerned is to blame for it, as well as not life, nor any outer destiny. Only in a few cases does it apply outside the rule, that other human beings, the environment or an outer destiny, are responsible for his or her leiden, ununderstanding, misunderstanding, etc. That affects the morale and psyche and his or her loss, such as when a human being dear to him or her is torn from life, and he or she thus falls into a psychical morale negative state and pain. Otherwise, it is such, however, that if the human being falls prey to a psychical morale, negative state and pain and suffers damage, he himself, she herself is to blame for it. Consequently, he or she also forges his or her own destiny, and indeed freely according to the proverb, the destiny of the human being is forged by he himself, she herself, or the human being himself or herself is the smith of his or her own destiny. If the human being says yes to that, and also approaches it well, positively and rightly, and evaluates what happens to him or her in his or her life, according to what life itself offers him or her, and what he or she contributes in this regard, just how he or she forms and uses it, then this is an act of his or her rationality, and his or her intellect. He or she does not kneel down in humility before life, but takes it into his or her own hands and willingly forms it along those lines according to that which is best, good and positive, just as he or she wants it to be, in a conscious intellect rationality-based wise, in order to be free, peaceful, happy, and satisfied in himself or herself. In this wise, he or she follows his or her clear certainty regarding the absolute efficacy of the creational natural principles and is always fair and just towards himself or herself, likewise towards all human beings and the whole environment. In this certainty, he or she never lives in the unfairness and enslavement of submissiveness and oppression, nor in a belief compelling him or her to some imaginary might over him or her, but in recognition of the reality and truth of the real life, which tells him or her that with and in him or her, as also in the world, everything happens in such a way as he or she creates it as a cause. So, all effects altogether always originate from what happened before and form the cause for the effect. Causality, that is to say the law of cause and effect, teaches that every cause, once set or created, inevitably and perforce brings a distinct effect arising from the cause. Thus the human being can understand that what happens to him or her today is based on the backgrounds and connections of what is happening, and reveal to him or her what he or she has done before, yesterday, the day before, weeks, months, or years ago, and has been put into the world as a cause. Consequently, the causal effect now comes about. In the free nature and its fauna and flora, as well as on the planet Earth in general, there is never a no to a happening, nor is there any complaint that something is unfair or unjust. This no is solely reserved for the consciously thinking human being, because he or she alone has the thought-feeling consciousness-based capability and freedom to willfully and consciously say a yes or no to something, and to make a decision that he or she can also carry out. Thus, the human being, and therefore everyone, has a free will and the power to create one's own creations, be it buildings, books, paintings, sculptures, etc., as well as one's own thoughts and feelings, etc. This free will, with which he himself, she herself can decide on and be in charge of himself or herself and his or her personality, his or her morality and character, his or her personal individual attitude and modes of behavior, is an inestimably great gift of the creational nature, which he or she must consciously use and employ in order to do everything for his or her happiness and satisfaction. After having descended for long years into unfathomable depths with his or her negative, bad and ungood thoughts and feelings together with his or her consciousness, and having been unfree, unhappy and unsatisfied, it is now time for the human being to resurface from these depths and to begin to consciously use and control his or her thoughts and feelings and consciousness, and to become a true, free, happy, and satisfied human being. So he or she must turn away from his or her victimhood and sacrificial existence, into which he or she has maneuvered himself or herself, because as a free human being, he or she is his or her own lord and master, and is able to turn to his or her life in a self-determining and responsibility-conscious way, and to enjoy it from now on to the fullest, as well as in inner freedom and joy, as also in harmony, happiness, and satisfaction. The human being must say a yes to life, and to that which is now and tomorrow as well as in the future, and he or she must open the door for the changes to the best, the good and the positive for his or her new life. In doing so, he or she must not reject the good and positive of the new life, but must always reach for it and make the best of it. He or she must not reject anything in the process, because otherwise it will persist and come again and again, precisely until that moment when he or she takes hold of it and processes it in the right kind and wise, for his or her own benefit. And if he or she now opens himself or herself and says a raised yes to life, then he or she opens the floodgates to the flow of all things that fill his or her life with inner freedom and harmony, with peace and joy, love, happiness, and satisfaction. He or she must not continue to block the floodgates to this, but really open them and let in the boon of all creational natural existence in himself or herself, so that he or she can finally come out of the vicious circle of his or her own rejection, tormenting, disesteem, and condemnation into the radiant light of himself or herself and his or her true greatness. For this purpose, it is only necessary that he or she agrees with these fundamental thoughts and the feelings resulting from them, realizes them, lets them take effect in him or her, and makes them to his or her personal moral everyday behavior. Simya Say Silver Star Center, January 24th, 2016, 15:20 p.m. Billy.
According to Billy, lead has the meaning of a psychical morale negative state, and leiden means ununderstanding, misunderstanding, and so on, which affects the morale and psyche. Lead and leiden means that the event affects the psyche and therefore is not to be translated with suffering or affliction, which pertain more to the physical body.